The first step in outsmarting a narcissist begins where all true power does, with emotional mastery. You cannot defeat a narcissist by fighting on their battlefield, because their strength lies not in logic or truth, but in emotional manipulation. They thrive in chaos. They feed on reaction. Their sense of control depends entirely on their ability to provoke you, to make you doubt yourself, lose composure, and surrender to their emotional rhythm. When you react impulsively, you hand them the very weapon they use against you. So the game, if you can call it that, is won not through confrontation, but through detachment. Emotional detachment doesn't mean indifference. It doesn't mean coldness or shutting down your empathy. It means discipline, the kind of discipline that allows you to observe without absorbing, to witness their performance without participating in it. It's a skill, a psychological art form. And it starts with understanding what the narcissist really wants from you. What they seek isn't love or respect or even attention in the ordinary sense. It's psychological fuel. They want to feel powerful, superior, central. And the easiest way to achieve that is to make you emotional. Every outburst, every tear, every desperate attempt to reason with them reinforces their illusion that they control your state of mind. When you detach emotionally, that illusion shatters. Suddenly, they can't read you. They can't predict your next move. They can't provoke the reaction that feeds their ego. And that confusion, that loss of control, terrifies them. Because what most people don't realize is that narcissists are fundamentally fragile. They build their entire identity around external validation. Without your emotional energy reflecting back to them, they start to collapse under the weight of their own emptiness. But detaching isn't easy. It requires you to confront something uncomfortable within yourself, your own emotional dependency. Because let's be honest, part of the reason narcissists gain so much power over others is that we often crave their approval. Their charm, their charisma, their intensity, it draws people in. They create an illusion of connection so intoxicating that when it starts to fade, you chase it. And that chase is where you lose yourself. Emotional detachment begins when you stop chasing illusions and start grounding yourself in reality. You begin to realize that you don't need to react to every insult or manipulation. You don't need to defend yourself against every distortion of the truth. You don't need to prove your worth to someone who profits from your self-doubt. Once that insight lands, your posture changes, literally and psychologically. You become still. You stop dancing to their rhythm. And when that happens, the narcissist senses something they can't understand, strength without aggression. It's not loud, it's not performative, it's quite authority. Now, that calmness isn't passivity, it's strategy. Think of it like psychological aikido. Instead of meeting force with force, you let it pass through you. You conserve your energy. You stop being reactive and start being intentional. Every time they bait you with insults, exaggerations, or guilt, you respond with neutrality. You remove the emotional reward. You become unreadable. That's when their power begins to erode. And it's fascinating because in that stillness, you begin to see the pattern for what it truly is. A desperate performance by someone who cannot tolerate emotional stability. The narcissist doesn't know what to do with calmness because calmness reflects back their lack of control. It's a mirror they can't look into without crumbling. So they'll escalate, they'll test you, they'll push harder to provoke a reaction because they need that emotional exchange to feel alive. But if you maintain your composure, if you remain grounded in your clarity, they eventually exhaust themselves. What's left after that is silence. And in that silence, something profound happens. You start to hear yourself again. The noise that once consumed you, the chaos they created, starts to fade. You begin to realize that emotional detachment isn't just a defense mechanism. It's liberation. It's the ability to see clearly, to act from reason rather than fear. It's the reestablishment of your internal authority. And when you reach that point, you stop trying to argue them, or expose them. You no longer need to prove their flaws. You simply stop playing. Because the narcissist cannot manipulate what they can't access. And once you control your emotions, you become inaccessible to their tactics. That's the quiet paradox of emotional detachment. The less you react, the more power you actually have. So if you want to outsmart a narcissist, you begin not by learning their tricks, but by mastering yourself. You learn to stay calm when provoked, centered when challenged, and silent when baited. You stop allowing their chaos to dictate your peace. That's the beginning of real intelligence. The kind that doesn't just outthink manipulation, but outgrows it entirely. And the moment you do, you realize something deeper, that the greatest revenge is not defeating them, but becoming untouchable. because nothing terrifies a narcissist more than a person who feels deeply yet cannot be controlled. If emotional detachment is the foundation of psychological freedom, then boundaries are the architecture that protects it. Because once you stop reacting emotionally to a narcissist, the next challenge is to make your limits clear, not through argument, but through consistent action. And this is where most people stumble. They think boundaries are about confrontation, about declaring rules or demanding respect. But that's not it. A true boundary is not a negotiation. It's a quiet recognition of what you will and will not allow into your life, followed by behavior that enforces it. The narcissist thrives in blurred lines. Their entire strategy depends on infiltration of your emotions, your time, your self-perception. They probe for weaknesses in your sense of identity, testing how far they can push before you resist. And every time you bend, every time you make an exception, every time you explain or justify, they learn something crucial, that your limits are flexible once they know that they own the dynamic, because manipulation always depends on access. To outsmart them, you have to learn to communicate in a language they can't distort, the language of consistent action. You can't appeal to their empathy because they don't have any genuine empathy to appeal to. You can't reason your way to mutual understanding because they don't seek understanding. They seek control. But what they do understand at a primal level is consequence. Not the kind delivered through anger or punishment, but the kind delivered through calm withdrawal. The narcissist may argue with your words, but they cannot argue with your absence. This is where self-respect becomes a living boundary. When you say no and mean it, when you enforce silence instead of explanation, you teach them something they can't tolerate, that you're not theirs to manage, that your attention is no longer guaranteed. Boundaries, in this sense, are not about changing them. They're about reclaiming yourself. They're about refusing to participate in the emotional economy that keeps them powerful. And it takes courage because narcissists don't respect boundaries. They test them. They'll guilt trip you, play the victim, flatter you, or turn hostile, anything to make you drop your guard. The moment you assert yourself, they'll twist the narrative. You're so selfish. You've changed after everything I've done for you. These tactics are not random. They're rehearsed survival mechanisms. Each one is designed to pull you back into compliance, to make you doubt the legitimacy of your own limits. That's why holding boundaries is not just a behavioral act, it's a psychological revolution. It's you choosing truth over comfort, integrity over approval. And here's the hard part. When you enforce a boundary with a narcissist, it will feel wrong at first. It will feel cold, unkind, maybe even cruel. That's because your nervous system has been trained to equate self-abandonment with safety. You've been conditioned to keep the peace by sacrificing your needs. But boundaries are the opposite of cruelty. They're the truest form of respect, both for yourself and for others. Because without them, relationships collapse into power struggles and resentment. You'll notice something fascinating once your boundaries start to hold. The narcissist will begin to lose their composure. Their words will become sharper, their attempts at control more obvious. They'll oscillate between charm and rage because they're trying to find the version of you who used to yield, but that version no longer exists. The calm consistency of your limits exposes their instability. It holds up a mirror they cannot bear to look into because your strength reveals their weakness. Your self-control highlights their dependency on chaos, and eventually something shifts inside you. The anxiety that used to flood you when they pushed your limits starts to fade. You begin to realize that you don't need to defend your boundaries with justification. The simple act of holding them is enough. You start speaking less, explaining less, and doing more through quiet, deliberate action. You cancel the call. You walk out of the argument. You say, "No, that doesn't work for me," and you mean it. Each time you do, you reinforce the most powerful psychological message you can send: my peace is not for sale. And once that message becomes part of who you are, something extraordinary happens. The narcissist loses leverage. They can no longer bait you into emotional confusion. They can no longer guilt you into compliance. They can no longer play the puppet master with your reactions because you've removed the strings. The beauty of boundaries is that they don't just protect you from others. They clarify who you are. They teach you what your values actually mean when tested. They force you to live in alignment with the truth, not with fear. And that's where your intelligence becomes wisdom, when you realize that saying no isn't about rejection, it's about direction. So if you want to outsmart a narcissist, remember this: your greatest defense is consistency, not confrontation. Boundaries are not weapons, they're walls built of self-respect. You don't raise your voice, you raise your standards. And when you do, the narcissist can no longer reach you because you're no longer standing on the same ground. Every narcissist operates within a script. That's how they maintain control, by assigning roles to everyone around them and manipulating those roles to serve their ego. They see themselves as the main character, the architect of a psychological drama in which everyone else is cast as supporting characters: the admirer, the rescuer, the scapegoat, the fool. And as long as you keep playing your assigned part, the story continues exactly as they've written it. The only way to outsmart a narcissist is to stop playing the role they've given you. You have to step out of their script entirely and write your own. The problem is, most people don't realize they've been cast until the story is already halfway through. It starts subtly. At first, you're the idealized partner, the perfect friend, the promising employee, the one who finally gets them. You're showered with attention, validation, praise. It feels intoxicating because it taps into something ancient and deeply human, the desire to be seen and valued. But with a narcissist, it's never genuine admiration, it's emotional bait. The moment you take it, they start rewriting your character. Suddenly, your role shifts. You go from perfect to problematic, from ally to adversary, from asset to threat. And here's the trap. The more you try to prove that you're not what they accuse you of being, the deeper you fall into their narrative. They say, "You're selfish," and you rush to prove your selflessness. They say, "You're overreacting," and you work harder to appear calm. Every attempt to clarify or correct gives them more control because you're still responding to the identity they've imposed on you. You're living inside their psychological framework. You're defending yourself against a script that was written to keep you powerless. The way out isn't through argument, it's through refusal. You stop playing. You recognize that the version of you that exists in their story is not real. It's a projection, a distortion, a tool of manipulation. And once you understand that, you can step back and see the entire dynamic for what it is: theater. They're performing, always performing, and they need an audience to keep the illusion alive. When you withdraw your emotional participation, the performance collapses. But stepping out of that role takes courage, because it often means losing the illusion of the relationship itself. It means accepting that the person you thought you were dealing with never truly existed either. They were also a character in the script, designed to draw you in. The charm, the warmth, the apparent vulnerability, it was all part of the act. That realization can feel devastating. It's like waking up from a dream that once felt beautiful but turns out to have been a deception. And yet, that awakening is where your strength begins. When you stop playing the role, you reclaim authorship over your own narrative. You begin to act, not react. You stop filtering your words and decisions through their expectations. You stop measuring your worth by their approval. Instead, you start living by internal principles: truth, integrity, and self-respect. And that's something the narcissist cannot tolerate, because their entire sense of power depends on defining who you are. Here's the deeper truth. Narcissists are not just afraid of being ignored, they're afraid of being irrelevant. The moment you refuse to participate in their story, you remind them of something they've spent their whole lives running from: the fact that they have no identity outside the roles they control. Your refusal exposes their emptiness. It's not vengeance, it's revelation. Now, practically speaking, refusing the role doesn't mean open rebellion. It's not about confrontation or grand declarations. It's often much quieter. It's a subtle shift in energy. You stop explaining, you stop overgiving, you stop responding to false accusations. You replace justification with silence, and over time, that silence becomes power. They'll try harder at first, testing you with insults, guilt, or false reconciliation. But their power fades when the script no longer works. And what's left after the manipulation loses its grip is freedom. You start to see how much mental and emotional space was once occupied by trying to manage someone else's perception. You realize that your value doesn't come from being understood by them, it comes from understanding yourself. That's when your posture changes. You stop being reactive and you start being sovereign. You move differently, you speak differently, you think clearly again. It's fascinating to watch what happens when you reclaim your identity from a narcissist. They'll say you've changed, that you're cold or arrogant. But that's not what's happening. You're simply becoming immune to manipulation. You're no longer responding to the version of yourself they created. You're responding to truth. And that's how you outsmart them. Not by playing a better role, but by refusing to act in their play altogether. You stop performing, and in doing so, you force them to confront their own emptiness. You remind them that control only exists when someone agrees to be controlled. The narcissist's greatest weapon is illusion. But illusion only works on those who still believe in it. Silence is one of the most underestimated forms of intelligence. It's not weakness, and it's not passivity. It's strategy. In a world dominated by noise, the ability to withhold words becomes a form of power, especially when you're dealing with a narcissist. Because a narcissist lives through verbal combat, their power lies in emotional chaos. They provoke, distort, and bait you into reacting because reaction is their fuel. The moment you respond with anger, panic, or defense, you've stepped onto their stage, and once you're on that stage, you're no longer free. Strategic silence removes you from the performance entirely. It's how you starve the narcissist of what they crave most: emotional relevance. It's not just silence in the literal sense of not speaking, it's silence of reaction, silence of explanation, silence of defense. You stop narrating your intentions to someone who twists every word. You stop trying to prove your innocence to someone invested in misunderstanding you. Narcissists don't argue for truth, they argue for control. So the less you say, the fewer weapons they have to use against you. Every sentence you offer them becomes ammunition, twisted to fit their narrative. When you realize this, silence stops feeling like surrender and starts feeling like precision. There's a kind of psychological discipline in choosing silence. Because it's hard. Every instinct in you wants to respond, to correct the lie, to defend your character. But those instincts are exactly what the narcissist relies on. They know your conscience, your decency, your desire to be fair. They manipulate those qualities to keep you engaged, to keep the emotional tether intact. So when you finally stop talking, when you meet their chaos with calm and their provocation with stillness, it sends a shock through their system. It's like removing oxygen from a fire. It flickers, sputters, and eventually dies out. But make no mistake, the first moments of silence will be met with resistance. Narcissists cannot tolerate the absence of reaction because your attention is the mirror in which they see themselves. When that mirror goes dark, they panic. They'll escalate. They'll accuse, provoke, insult, anything to pull you back into dialogue, because dialogue means control. Even negative attention feeds their ego. They'd rather be hated than ignored, because hate still means relevance. Indifference, though, that's annihilation. That's what strategic silence achieves. It denies them the illusion of importance. And it's interesting, philosophically, to think about what silence really represents. It's not merely the absence of noise. It's the presence of clarity. It's you choosing to preserve your peace over proving your point. It's self-possession expressed through restraint. When you respond to every attack, you're living reactively, which means your behavior is still being shaped by theirs. But silence is autonomous. It's a declaration that says, you no longer define my movement. It's an act of sovereignty. This doesn't mean you suppress your feelings. Silence isn't repression, it's redirection. It's the decision to take your emotional energy and invest it where it matters, in your own growth, in your healing, in your reality. Instead of shouting into the void of their delusion, you channel that energy toward building something meaningful. You stop arguing about who you are and start becoming who you are. That's how silence transforms from a reaction into a revolution. Now, there's a subtle art to doing this right. It's not about using silence to manipulate or punish. That would make you no different than them. It's about using silence to anchor yourself in truth. You respond only when there's purpose, not provocation. You speak only when your words serve clarity, not chaos. That's how silence becomes active rather than passive. It's the calm in the center of the storm, the space where your power gathers instead of disperses. And what's